Hi, if you like the video, please remember to subscribe. Hi everybody, what I'm going to try and do in this video is answer the question about whether a budget prime lens like the Canon 50mm f1.8 or the 40mm f2.8 pancake really is sharper than the ever-present kit lens, the Canon 18-55 f3.5 to 5.6 IS-EFS, when shooting at the same focal length, so 50mm or 40mm. And also at a couple of different apertures. So when the lenses are at their widest, so for the primes it'll be for the 50 1.8, for the 40 2.8, and for the 18-55 at 5.6 when it's at 50 or 40, and also when the lenses are stopped down to f8, where theoretically all the lenses should be roundabout in their sweet spot and at their sharpest. I want to answer this question because when money is tight, like it is for most of us, it can be tricky deciding where to spend your money on to improve your kit. And fast primes are often touted as a good way to go. And although obviously they'll give you a short depth of field and better low light performance, are they really any better for general walk around photography on sunny days? So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a look at some test images. I took these on a sunny day down at one of the marinas in Gosport using my 600D T3i on a tripod to make sure I eliminated the camera shake. I shot in RAW and haven't done any post-processing to the photos. One final thing though, the Canon 51.8 I use in the video is the Mark I version, but expect similar results from the Mark II. Okay, so let's get started. What you can see here is a typical version of, this is what the 18-55 would see of the scene where I was at 18mm. Very wide. There's obvious this distortion in the photo, but you know, you can fit a lot in and it's a nice focal length for taking landscapes and things like that. However, if you're thinking about upgrading to a fast prime, a 40mm or a 50mm, because they're about the cheapest primes you can get, you get a very different view. So the 40mm would give you that view, obviously zoomed in quite a bit, and the 50mm gives you that view, so you're very, very zoomed in. Remember, the camera was at the same location for all of these shots. So there is a bit of a compromise when you're running with a prime, a 40 or a 50, because they are a little bit telephoto on a crop sensor body like my 600D T3i. However, the fact that you do have to choose which bit of the scene to aim your camera at can often improve your photos. But you could also do that simply by setting your zoom to 40mm or 50mm, couldn't you? So what we're going to look at now is we're going to be comparing the 18-55 at 40mm with the 40mm. The 18-55 will be at f5.6, which is its widest aperture, at 40mm, because it's a variable aperture zoom. So basically, as you zoom in, the aperture, relative aperture kind of tightens up, and the 40mm will be at 2.8. So this is what we would see. And let's go to the next photo. So that's the 40, and that's the 18-55. You can't really see any difference. So what we need to do is zoom in to 100% for that one. So that's the 18-55. And let's just wiggle them a little bit so they look the same. And so kind of what I was trying to do in the photos was focus on this kind of, I don't know what it is really, rope thing, mast in the middle of the photo. And what you can see when you compare these photos is, funnily enough, the 18-55 wide open, which is 5.6 at 40mm, is actually a little bit sharper than the 40mm. If we look at the background, look at these bushes in the background of the 40, you can see they're a little bit blurred, where on the 18-55 they're not. Now this is probably because of depth of field, so that by focusing on this thing in the foreground, well, it's not really, it's quite a long way away, at 5.6 we're getting everything in focus, where with the 40mm f2.8 we're not. So let's move over a little bit to look at these radar things. So go back to the 18-55, drag that over. But when we look at this as well, what you can see is that there isn't really that much difference. These lines of the rigging look a little bit sharper on the 18-55. So what we can kind of take from looking at these is that at 40mm at wide open, the kit lens, the 18-55, is probably a shade sharper than the 40mm when it is wide open f2.8. But obviously normally you'd be using it at f2.8 if you're in low light conditions or trying to achieve a shallow depth of field look for something like a portrait or a macro. So let's move on. So now this is the 18-55 at 50mm, again shut up to f5.6, and this is the 50mm prime, the 1.8 open all the way to 1.8. So let's zoom in again. That's the 18-55. Let's zoom on the 50, and let's move that rope in the middle. And what you can see straight away here is that the 18-55 is definitely a little bit sharper. With the 50mm, we've almost got, it's almost like glowing. There's definitely maybe some flare or kind of glare going on that's reducing the overall contrast. There's probably a shade more detail in the bushes at the back, but let's wander over to these radar domes over here. That's the 18-55, and then with the 50, let's move them and let's have a look. You can see definitely the 18-55 looks sharper. There's more contrast. And again, this is probably a reflection that, again, the 18-55 is at f5.6, because that's as wide as it will go at 50mm, and the 50mm at 1.8, you know, that really is a very, very wide aperture. Now, you probably noticed in these photos, I'm not looking right in the corners and looking for vignetting, all this sort of stuff, because, you know, I don't really care if photos are a little bit soft in the corners, because I don't look right in the corners of my photographs. I don't think anybody does, and these aren't test images. But what we can see from those images is that if you want to shoot with your 18-55 at 40 or 50mm, it will actually be a fraction sharper than the 40 or the 50 if you were shooting wide open. Not that you'd particularly be walking around doing that, but that's quite interesting, I think. So now let's dive in and look at the 18-55 at 40 and the 18-55 at 50, but this time all the lenses are at f8. So this is our first one. That's the 18-55 at 40mm at f8, and that's the 40mm at f8. Let's go back to zoom into the middle again to the 40. Let's zoom in 100%, and straight away you can see both pictures are significantly sharper. There's more contrast, more detail, and to be honest, there isn't really that much difference in the photos. So that's the 40mm. Let's go and have a look at our little radar domes over here, because there's lots of rigging behind. Where are we? That's the 40mm there. So the 40mm's in the middle. That's the 18-55. And what we're looking at here is kind of the writing here. This little yellow ball up here and these lines in the background. Can we see any more details in either? They look suspiciously similar to me. Yeah, can't really see much difference at all. In fact, let's look at this. There's a crane or something right in the distance in the background. Yeah, I mean, we can see the detail on those. So with the 18-55 at 40 and the 40mm both at f8, there isn't really that much difference in sharpness between those two photos at all. So let's look at the 18-55 at 50. And there's the 50mm at 50, again, both at f8. Let's zoom in 100% on that little bit of rope in the middle. Let's zoom in on this one. Let's get it in the middle. And let's have a look. So we're looking at the rope again, and these lines, these cranes in the background, and the bushes. The 18-55 looks fine. Let's look at the 50. Now the 50, in fact, might be a tad sharper. Maybe a tad sharper. I can see more detail in these cranes in the background and the bushes. So let's come over to our radar domes over here. This is the 50. Let's go back to the 18 to 55. Let's get them in the middle. Let's just flick backwards and forwards and compare the two. What can we see? Yes, there's definitely a little bit more detail, I would say, in the 50 at f8. Back here, that looks a little bit softer in the 18 to 55, where it looks nice and sharp. I did take a number of photos of each of these things to try and pick out the sharpest ones to kind of get rid of any focusing errors. But yeah, the 50 is probably a hair sharper than the 18 to 55. So let's come out of that. So as you can see, that that really is some quite interesting results with the 40mm f2.8, the 18 to 55, and the 50mm. I mean, basically, of course, the aim of the video was to answer the question of whether the Canon EF 40mm 2.8 and the EF 50mm 1.8 was sharper than the common kit lens, the EFS 18 to 55 35 to 5.6, at the comparable focal lengths when used with the widest available aperture in f8, which is probably the sweet spot of each lens. And again, the reason for asking this question is that we've all probably got an 18 to 55, and should we be spending our hard-earned money on these prime lenses unless we've got a significant need? In other words, you want a very small quiet lens, which the 40mm is, or you wanted a fantastic low light performance and super narrow depth of field, which the 50mm 1.8 gives you. Or should we just be taking a little bit more time to learn how to get the best out of our existing kit lenses? Now remember, these photos were captures of real scenes and they weren't a test card, and I didn't zoom in beyond 100%, so these comparisons won't pick up the differences that a much closer and scientific inspection would discover. But who's got the time for that? And remember, the test photos were taken on a sunny day using a tripod and do not reflect the low light performance of either the 40 or the 50mm. And remember that the 18 to 55, when it's 40mm, closes up to f5.6, so the 40mm at 2.8 is 2 whole stops faster. In other words, if your shutter speed with the 18 to 55 was, say, a 25th of a second, by using the 40mm at f2.8, your shutter speed will increase to a 100th of a second, which is a significant increase. Now, you may say that the 18 to 55 has image stabilization, which should make up a 2-stop advantage, but remember that IS only combats camera shake and not subject movement, so you'd be much better off with a 40mm if you're taking photos of people or anything else that's moving in low light. This test also didn't look at depth of field, and the 40 and the 50 will give you a narrower depth of field than the 18 to 55. But another way to deal with that, if you do want that, is if you've got a kit zoom, say the 55 to 250, just stick that on your camera, take a few steps back, zoom in, and you'll get an even narrower depth of field. This test was all about sharpness, so let's look at my conclusions for that. I would suggest that the 18 to 55 is sharper and shows more detail than both the 40mm 2.8 and the 50mm 1.8 when all the lenses are at their widest aperture. Say f5.6 for the 18 to 55 for these focal lengths, and f2.8 and 1.8 respectively for the 40 and 50. I would say the 40 and the 50, well really the 50mm were a little bit sharper than the 18 to 55 when the lenses were at f8. I think you can see a little bit more detail in the 50, but really not that much to choose between the 40 and the 18 to 55. So I think the 18 to 55 came out of this test rather well. If you mainly take photos of subjects on sunny days and you tend to commonly shoot tighter, say around f8, which you can do on a sunny day, or even f16, you won't find that much technical advantage to using the 40mm or 50mm primes, beyond the fact that the primes force you to choose your composition more carefully, and that's no bad thing. But if you're trying to decide where to spend your money, perhaps you'd be better off looking at something super wide, like the 10 to 18, or maybe a flash or a speed light, or if you haven't got one already, a telephoto zoom, like the 55 to 250. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please, if you want to ask any questions, stick them in the comments down below or email me scalesbridge@gmail.com. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up. I'd really be thankful if you subscribed, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.